the open G is kind of like when you go to a restaurant, you're walking in with your open G, and the restaurant is one of those super mega buffets, right? So it's like, woo, I want to sample every single thing, right? And that's actually for the open G what you're supposed to do. With the open G, and this, by the way, is also true for our calibrators, our reflectors, right? Part of what has to happen through all of that sampling is that the open G then begins to understand through their own experience of all these different possibilities, all these different life stories, all these different identities and directions, if you will. You start to find which are the ones that feel good to you, right? Which are the ones that feel good to you, and start recognizing that those ones that feel good to you, those are your core values. Those are the parts of yourself that you will be orienting yourself towards eventually. And that becomes your compass, your due north. And you start to learn how to be at home within yourself, meaning you start to learn that these are the values that feel good to me. So when I walk into a room and let's say the juju in the room is funky, that's a technical term, right? And I have an open G, and I walk in there and I'm like, these people really, it just doesn't feel like, my people. This doesn't feel like my values. This doesn't feel like a place where I feel good, that I can be in this room and not feel like I have to fight to hold on to my alignment with myself, and to give yourself permission at that point to say, I'm out of here. You will learn eventually how to really navigate in a space, or how to get out of a space where you're like, nope, that's not the right space for me. And that's part of that internal sense of home. The wisdom of that G center is that after you've gone through the buffet a couple of times, right? Oh, the steak is good. The weird Velveeta they have over there for the mashed potatoes, no, just don't even need to try that again, right? Eventually, you have enough sampling to know that these are the things that I want and these are the things that I don't want. In terms of the wisdom, ultimately the gift of that open G is your ability to know others. That allows you to tailor what you create, in some cases, depending on your profession, or tailor how you might guide someone in terms of helping them find their own direction. So I think having an open G is a really great asset if you're a therapist or a coach, or if you're a jeweler, right? If you're a jeweler and you can sit with someone, you can really get a sense and a feel of who they are and their design, you can create something really well in response to knowing who they are. It is a very, I think, holistic kind of empathy. Like when you sit with someone and you have an open G, you're not necessarily feeling their emotional energy, you're feeling their whole story, right? And really recognizing that, oh, that's their story, and I don't have to take on their story as my own, right? And we go through that in all of our open centers. Oh, me, not me, right? Me, not me. That's where, though, ultimately you can start to use that as a gift, as a strength, as a way of really getting to know people deeply and to get to know love deeply, because this is also the center for love. You begin to cultivate inside of yourself a very strong and very evolved definition of what is love and how to be loving and how to recognize love and loving. Now, I think one of the things I want to say, and I have yet to figure out the fastest, easiest way to bypass this. I mean, I think you can decondition trauma fairly quickly. There's a lot of great techniques out in the world to help us move through trauma pretty quickly. I don't know if there's a workaround around the time that it takes to really understand your openness. I do think there's a certain amount of wisdom to say it takes time. And it's not something you're going to learn necessarily in a year. And I think there's an arc to that learning. Like in the beginning, when you first learn about your openness, you go out in the world and you experience your open centers, and you still keep reacting, right? You still keep living as you were before, except now you go, oh, that was my openness, right? That's phase one. You start to recognize in hindsight, oh, that was my openness, right? In phase two, you're like, I'm not going to respond through my open centers anymore. I'm just going to be who I am, and my openness is not going to be an issue. And then you go and still keep acting the same way. But now in hindsight, you're like, oh, I should have done this differently, right? That's actually a good sign. That's phase two. In phase three, you start to really be able to go, oh, I'm sensing this. And you start to be aware and create a little bit more of a gap there between your experience in your open centers and how you're going to ultimately choose to respond, because you get choice when you really understand that openness. You start to be able to stand in other people's energy fields and to be able to say, oh, I don't have to bite that hook. I don't have to be responsible for that. I don't have to play into whatever that is. I can just watch it. I can just see it. I can just approach it with empathy, right? That's a root of being an empath. You can be empathic, right? Or empathetic, sorry. And then eventually you start to be able to say, I understand open G energy. And because I understand open G energy, when I walk into a room, I have choices over how I'm going to choose to show up. Even if the energy in the room doesn't support it, you can literally borrow and lean on all of that wisdom of all those different ways that you've experienced G center energy. And you can choose, I'm going to use my G center this way today. You can't hold that sustainably, but you can choose it. You can consciously borrow that theme and play off of it for a bit, and then tuck it back in and go back and be your open self.